right, hello. I am Katie Strathmann with Bierman Autism Centers, and I've really been looking forward to this webinar where I get to discuss with you all how to navigate the leap from ABA to school settings and determine if you are ready or not. I also have Haley Swartz with me, who will share a ton of info with you about her experience in various school settings, which will better equip you in making decisions about eventual transitions to school. Kelsey already covered this, but everyone is on mute. Videos are off, so to ask a question, please type it in the chat. All right, before we get into our topic for tonight, I first wanted to share a bit about Bierman. Bierman Autism Centers is a playful, nurturing place where young children build foundational skills like communication and self-advocacy. Every child learns differently, and our one-on-one approach helps us track progress and support growth at each child's pace. We make learning fun by blending it naturally with play, helping kids stay motivated, confident, and excited to try new things. Our circle of care includes the whole family. We partner with parents through training and ongoing collaboration. And here are some of our pillars that we're kind of built off of. Let kids be kids. We accept every child for who they are, a unique person, and meet them where they are. We love learning, teaching through play, so kids can be learning through play. We erase the line between learning and play to keep children engaged and motivated. Empowerment is key. We use everyday activities to teach children foundational skills like self-advocacy and communication that they can use as they transition on to other settings. Engagement with families is really important. We believe in building connections and working towards shared goals. So understanding what your goal is for your child is very important to us. And we have a commitment to progress. We're dedicated to each child's everyday and long-term progress, which really segues nicely into this talk about the transition to settings where you can have that long-term progress. Bierman Autism Centers was founded in 2006 in Indianapolis and has since expanded to these 7 states, and then within those 7 states have expanded and continue to expand. We are an early intensive behavioral intervention provider, and primarily we provide comprehensive services, which are usually full-time. And because we are an EIBI provider, the vast majority of our clients will transition from our services into school settings. So today we will talk about navigating that process, the how, the when, and the why. Before we start, I have a disclaimer for today's presentation. Today's discussion will compare one-on-one ABA services and school-based services, but it is not about deciding which setting is better or superior. As we will discuss, each serves a different purpose with some overlap, and what matters is what is best to meet your child's needs right now. So I don't want anything that we say today to come across like ABA is better than school settings. We love our teachers. I come from a family of teachers. I deeply value the work that schools and educators do every day. And while I'm not a teacher myself, I've been a BCBA for almost 20 years, and some of my most meaningful work has been collaborating with teachers when kids transition successfully into school settings. So I just want to say that because we will be talking about some key differences between settings, that this is really just about how to make the best decision for your child at this moment. All right, so this presentation is designed to help you understand the differences between settings, recognize the strengths each one offers, so you can make informed decisions based on your child's current developmental readiness. There's really no one size fits all path, really just the path that supports your child's growth based on where they are today. We will also cover some potential barriers to overcome and how to successfully collaborate with schools to lead to a successful transition. All right, so let's dive in. Since most of our clients at Bierman tend to transition into public school settings, just if we look at the numbers, we are going to focus today on the comparisons between one-on-one ABA versus like a public school setting and what they can offer. Private schools can differ considerably from one school to another, just kind of depending on what they offer and what they specialize in. So we'll touch on them a little bit, but primarily in the next few slides, at least, we'll be talking about public school offerings. In terms of one-on-one ABA, at least at Bierman, we are center-based. There are obviously some home-based providers as well, but we are primarily center-based, and we provide comprehensive one-on-one ABA, broadly targeting a wide range of skills, and we tend to be full-time, 30 to 40 hours a week, in line with that early intensive behavioral intervention model. We are focused on closing the gap, so kind of seeing where kids are now and how do we close the gap between where they are and where their peers are so they can successfully integrate into school settings when they meet that readiness criteria. We provide one-on-one support at all times from a highly trained behavioral technician. That's what a BT is. Those behavioral technicians will implement the interventions that are kind of designed for them by their BCBA, so board certified behavior analyst. The board certified behavior analysts will have at least weekly contact. Usually it's 2, 3, maybe even 4 times a week. And their role is to review data and make changes, minor changes, but really important changes towards longer term goals. They also provide training to the BT, adjust behavior support plans as needed. And all of this is with the goal in mind of an eventual transition to a less restrictive setting. So a lot more will go into this in the next few slides. But just to make some initial comparison, in public school settings, depending on your child's needs as identified during the IEP development process, a student will typically be enrolled in either general education or will be provided with special education. If the term IEP is unfamiliar to you, we will talk in more detail later. But essentially, it's a document that outlines the level of support, the type of classroom, and the accommodations provided to your child if they qualify. The names for the specific classrooms within a school district will vary. General education refers to your typical classroom setting with a curriculum in place by grade that is followed by all of the students in the classroom. Some kids in general education classrooms will have IEPs, but most will not. In general ed, IEPs will document what support will be provided to your child in the classroom setting to access the academic content, but the level of support is usually low in comparison to what could be provided in a separate classroom as part of a special education placement. As you can see here, special education is more of an umbrella term to describe varying levels of support and corresponding physical environments to more individually meet your child's needs. Depending on the size of the school or the district, there will likely be multiple different types of classrooms separated by the support provided and the needs of the students. They're often grouped across a few grade levels, like you might have a kindergarten through 2nd grade in one class and 3rd through 5th in another. For larger districts or larger schools, there might be multiple K through 2 classrooms, maybe one that's specialized in, the kids that just need a little slower pace, but still working on that similar content. And then maybe a separate classroom for kids working more on, life skills, behavior support without as much overlap with the grade level academic curriculum. There might even be like autism support offerings. Important to note that oftentimes kids go back and forth across these settings. They're not necessarily in a special education separate classroom all day. It really depends on what their needs are. Maybe they push in for specials like art and gym class, but they come to a separate class for math and reading. What setting your learner or your child is in is going to depend on the IEP and what's available from the school, but also important to note that sometimes a recommendation is made for a type of setting that's not in your closest school. And I like to let parents know that depending on your district, there might be a certain type of classroom, but not in the school that's closest to you. So when that's the case, they may recommend that classroom that's, a couple neighborhoods over, but still a part of the public school district. In the case that the school district does not have an appropriate setting, after considering all the schools within the district, they may recommend an out-of-district placement or an outplacement. And this is when a school district places a student in a program because the district cannot meet their needs, including like specialized public programs, private special education schools, maybe schools specializing in behavioral challenges or communication needs, sometimes meeting different medical needs that the school can't adequately meet. The district typically does fund these placements, but it must be decided on by the IEP team as the least restrictive environment. So you can't just, necessarily request to go to one of these specialized programs and the school will pay for it. It has to be a decision made by the IEP team. A note on private schools. Private schools, like I said, can look very different from one school to another. They can look much like a general ed setting, or they can look much like a special education setting. But something of significance is that private schools do not have to follow an IEP. So if you opt for a private school option, just know that while they may state that they can individualize things for your child, legally they aren't obligated to do so. Many BCBAs, including myself, have not worked inside school settings, and as such, at Bierman, we provide staff training and have many systems in place to ensure that we are appropriately assessing and preparing learners for these eventual transitions. Likewise, many of our clients don't have school experience. They start in ABA, and unless they have older siblings, their caregivers' last experience in school might have been their own. So several years ago, many years ago. So next, I'm going to have one of our BCBAs who has been a teacher for 10 years outline some of the key differences across settings. Haley is a BCBA in one of our Indiana centers, but has spent most of her career thus far in several of the settings I discussed above. So I'm going to turn it over to Haley now.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you. Like Katie shared, I am actually fairly new to ABA. I've been a BCBA for less than a year. So most of my experience is in the schools, in the classrooms. So I was a special education teacher, and I actually taught in pretty much every version of elementary special education that there is. So I did more of like the push and pull out where the kiddo may be with a gen ed classroom, but getting support. Either I'm in the room supporting or they're coming with me. I've also taught a self-contained classroom where kiddos were, as Katie mentioned, maybe pushing out for certain times of the day, coming back to me. So it's kind of a balance within that sort of classroom. And then I've also taught life skills. So I've really spent much of my career just experiencing all there is in different schools, all in public schools. And one of the things that I'm super passionate about, and the reason I did make the switch to ABA, I was quite honestly, on the receiving end or on the sending end of a lot of ABA transitions. I had a ton of kids coming to me from ABA centers, and I was sending kids to ABA centers. And a lot of times that was a really it was a tough transition. It was sort of a fumble between the school and the ABA center. It was just never super clear. And so really what led me to ABA was I was like, I got to figure out what they're doing over there, which in turn led me to Bierman. And I'm so happy to be here with this company that really puts the thought and the time and the effort into making these transitions meaningful and really planning from the get-go of what we can do to support these kids as they make this transition. So super happy to be here with you guys. I'm going to take the next few slides and kind of we're just going to talk about the differences in these different places, different placements. So we're going to look through some different lenses as we look across, like what does the day look like for kids in these different places. So the first lens that we're going to look at is the teacher to student ratio. I'm sure many of you are the most familiar with this, especially if you've got kiddos already in school, siblings, or just your own experience with school. But in 1-1 ABA, like Katie mentioned, we're always 1-to-1, sometimes 2-to-1, depending on the needs of the kiddo. The BCBA is in really frequently, making changes, making really small changes, depending on the kiddo to get them to gain the skills that we need, as Katie said, bridging that gap. So bringing them to the skills that they need to be successful. Conversely, in a gen ed preschool, there might be a ratio of 1 teacher to 8 to 10 students, probably an assistant. In the schools that I've worked in, if it's a preschool within a school district, they usually have 1 or 2 assistants that bop between a few rooms, so they might not be in there the whole time. A gen ed kindergarten classroom really looks like about 1 teacher to 20 kids. Again, if you're in a public school, you're looking at probably more like 25. They get really busy in those rooms. Again, sometimes they will have assistants, but they likely will be like bopping around the different rooms and won't be in one room all the time. But really a big difference there in a gen ed classroom. 1-to-1 support is just rarely provided. So that's a big difference from ABA. In the special education room, your ratio is likely to be more around like 1 to 3 to 5. In my experience, when I taught in a self-contained special education classroom, it fluctuated between 10 to 12 kids, and I had an assistant that was always in my room all the time. So 2 adults and about 10 kids in there. that setting makes it more likely for some one-to-one to happen, but not for all of the day. So we're able to pull kids. Maybe I can work one-on-one with a kid, and then my assistant can run the rest of the classroom, that type of thing. But that one-to-one is still kind of hard to get even in that setting. And then like Katie mentioned, just in special ed, the most variability is going to happen in there, right? Because depending on what kind of classroom it is, and what bucket like kids are falling into, it'll just depend on the support, and it can be really flexible, which is a good thing. The next lens that we'll look at is instruction type. So, how are our kids being taught in these settings? How are they learning the skills that they need to learn? So, in ABA, again, we're one-to-one, we're highly individualized. We can choose a very specific goal and we can break it down, break it down, break it down, and start making really small gains towards like a longer term goal. It's flexible pace and flexible content. So, we have the ability to do that within ABA. When we look at instruction in more of like a preschool setting, it's a lot of group. So it's not going to be a ton of like one-on-one or small group, but a lot of group. And then it's a lot of play-based. So they do a lot of play-based learning within that preschool setting. Um, Kindergarten is a big jump. I always like say to parents, it's tough being a kindergartner because it is a big jump. It's a lot of large whole group instruction. The model that most classrooms will follow is an I do, we do, you do. So what that looks like is the teacher, whatever the lesson for the day might be, is up at the front of the room showing the kiddos how to do a certain type of skill. Then they might do something where they do it together. So the kids are watching the teacher, they might be following along on a piece of paper. And then it's turned off to independent time where they're working on something. The teacher might be circulating around the room. But again, remembering that ratio, we're at 1 to 20 or 25 kids. So one teacher, lots of kids expected to be watching that teacher and learning new content in that large group setting. It's fast paced. They are rigid to the curriculum. So we've got a lesson for today and we've got a new lesson for tomorrow. So I'm teaching you one thing today and I'm teaching you something new tomorrow. So it's really fast paced in those gen ed kindergarten rooms. If the child comes into kindergarten with an IEP, they can have some accommodations, which are just little things throughout the day that might help them. So maybe they can have access to like a wiggle seat that they can sit if they need to move a little bit, or maybe they have access to ask for a break and step away, or maybe they can pace in the back of the room. Those are just some different accommodations that a kiddo might have, but they're still expected to follow along with that content and keep going with the class. In the special education classroom, then it's much more individualized paced. It might be a modified curriculum depending on the classroom. So a modified curriculum, meaning if I'm working with kiddos that are third grade through fifth grade in one classroom, but they're working maybe at a kindergarten level, like their skills are not at where in third grade it's multiplication. So maybe we're not there. I'm going to pull from that standard of third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, and I'm going to bring it down to the level of where the kid's at. So that would be an example of modifying that curriculum. So it can move a little bit slower. It can be individualized to what the kiddo needs and what they're working on. Small group, some independent work, and then, like I said before, some one-to-one with the teacher for some short periods. Our next lens that we're going to look at then is how much independence is expected. So how much is my kiddo going to need to be maneuvering around this classroom on their own? How much are they going to be expected to just follow a whole group direction? So as far as ABA goes, it's completely individualized and it's according to specific prompt levels. So as we teach new skills, BCBAs will come in and assess where they're at. Maybe they need some physical prompting to help them know where to, or how to get this item from here to there. Maybe they need more gesture prompting, visual prompting, whatever it might be. The BCBAs are able to go in, assess that, write the programs for that, and then we can fade it out as we need to. So that's kind of how independence moves in the ABA world. When you're looking at more of like in the school world for gen ed preschool, those skills are emerging. The kiddos are little, 3, 4. They're still learning a lot of these independent skills. Think about like putting on your shoes, putting on your jacket, things like that. So those are things that 3 and 4 year olds are still learning. So they have the time to teach those, but it is pretty expected that the kiddos are going to catch on pretty quick, and that they're going to get them going after, not too much time, after they teach them for a little bit, and then that they pick up on it and keep moving. Um, I'll keep saying it, but kindergarten is a really big jump. So that independence level in kindergarten is really high. A lot of times it is that group direction. So the teacher will give them maybe a 3-step direction of, okay, I need you to push in your chair, turn in your paper, and go to your cubby and get your jacket. Maybe, thinking about stringing those directions together. Can our kiddos follow multiple directions at one time, just coming from one teacher without them having to come by and give them reminders and things like that? That teacher is busy. There's a lot of kids in there. And so if that's not an accommodation or something written into the IEP, that those kids will be expected to follow those directions without additional prompting. And then in special ed, again, you can imagine it kind of falls somewhere in between, right? So there's a little more support wherever needed. If there's a missing skill that we need to work on, we can likely take the time to do that, as we in those rooms probably have a little bit more support, a teacher and an assistant. So one person can help and assist and kind of grow and help develop those skills. So it can be a little bit more individualized, but it's still quite a few kids to 2 teachers. So there is still a level of, following directions and independence that's just expected when you go into those rooms as well. Behavior support. So this one is huge. So a great thing about ABA is that we are able to be proactive a lot. So when we write our behavior support plans, if you see BSP on here, that is a behavior support plan. If you're in a school, it might be called a behavior intervention plan, anything like that. It's how we're supporting kiddos when they're having tough moments. So we are able to be proactive. And what that means is setting up the environment to how we can hopefully not get our kids to engage in those behaviors, those challenging behaviors. So we can provide them with lots of models of language. We can manipulate the environment. We can use tons of visuals. We can work on different things throughout the day to help practice tolerance. So when those things come up unexpectedly, they're more ready for them. So in ABA, we're able to be super proactive, and that's what our therapists are doing all day long. They are doing these proactive things to help us not get into those situations where kiddos are struggling. And then it is also reactive. So what do we do when we are in a challenging behavior? In ABA, you're able to follow the steps and be, everyone's on the same page and we're all reacting the same way so that we can reinforce what we need to when it comes to the behavior. So highly individualized in those scenarios in the ABA world. As far as school goes, then thinking about what behavior support might look like for kids in these different settings. So in a preschool, universal routine. So they're following a whole group instructions, and then they're expected to follow whatever, the whole group. We have listening ears, we have catch a bubble, things like that are universal routines for these kids. There's a high tolerance for age-appropriate behaviors in a preschool setting. 3-year-olds have a lot of emotions. I've got a 3-year-old at home. He's got a lot of feelings. So they have a high tolerance for those kinds of things. So we get that in the gen ed in that gen ed preschool room, but are able to support those kiddos in that moment and kind of help them along. But rarely can they follow an individualized behavior support plan. So if Jimmy has a whole set of reactive steps for when he has, a moment of flopping to the ground or whatever it might be, that's going to be really hard for one preschool teacher to implement in the classroom, given that she's got a bunch of other kiddos there as well. So the same kind of goes for kindergarten when you think about it. So a lot of times they have the same kind of behavior structure. They might have behavior rewards that are like whole group. So if everybody, keeps a quiet mouth for the next 5 minutes, we get 5 extra minutes of recess or whatever it might be. So there might be something like that. It's minimal individualization because they have a lot going on in those rooms, unless a kid has an IEP where things are explicitly stated in those that they can get a little bit more support. And then in the special education classrooms, those self-contained classrooms, they may be able to implement those behavior support plans, but really it's going to be probably a lot more reactive than proactive. So are they able to do those things, those environmental things, or be prompting the functional language consistently for every kid throughout the day to help prevent these behaviors? Probably not. Will they be able to implement a support plan reactively if they need to? They probably could do that, depending on the magnitude of the behavior, right? So that's important to know, just thinking about like the different placements and how much behavior support kiddos might need in those realms. The next lens that we'll look at then is our child's audience. So who our kiddos are speaking to every day. In the ABA world, our kiddos have familiar staff. So they've got their one-to-one with them. I know at Bierman, we typically try to do, we have a team usually of 3 RBTs. So the kiddos will have a morning, a midday, and an afternoon, but that team should be consistent every day. So they're with the same people every day. The RBTs are right there with them. They should be right next to them at all times. Rarely are they across the room where their BTs are here. They should be with them all the time. They might go to small group at some times where they might have, like sitting next to other kids. But again, there's other RBTs there. So there's a lot of adult support no matter where they're at. And then these adults also have a high tolerance for articulation that might present a little bit challenging to understand once, you've worked with a kid for a while. Oh, I know what he's trying to say, and kind of help with that. They might be able to tolerate that persistent requesting. So if we're having a kiddo that's requesting, I want the red ball, I want the red ball, I want the red ball over and over, our therapists are able to take that in. Thank you for using your words, but it's not available right now, and able to give them that rationale, perhaps several times in a row. So highly individualized, somebody's right there with them at all times. Moving into then these different lenses, gen ed preschool, that proximity is like the biggest thing, right? So they're not going to have an adult right next to them to kind of help them through each step of the day. Their group is a mid-sized group, but there's lots of distractions. There's lots of kids doing other things. So there's lots to look at in the room and get distracted by and potentially miss out on a direction that was given. And then also just thinking about the peers that they're speaking to. Do peers have a tolerance for some things, if our client can't be understood, or if the kid can't be understood, peers likely will have a low tolerance for that and will move on if they can't be understood, or if someone's requesting over and over to them, they probably likely will have a low tolerance for that and just move on. And then in kindergarten, much of the same, but large group, lots of distractions. And then that teacher, just thinking about that teacher again, 20, 25 kids in a room, one teacher who's doing her best. She is circling that room and helping kids where she can, but it's not going to be consistent and always right there when the kiddos need it. And then in that special education room, peers and teachers are familiar, not immediately right next to them, but it is probably going to be a smaller little group. So they might not be 20 kids away. They might be just a few kids away. So that can be helpful. Moderate tolerance from the teacher, meaning that the teacher might be able to persist and work out something with the kiddo if they need it in that moment, but then having to move along and also keep the day going. So just thinking about who the kids are talking to. This next one is huge, reinforcement. So how do our kiddos access that reinforcement? So reinforcement is in ABA how we shape behavior. It's how we maneuver. It's how we teach skills. It's how we teach tolerance. It all flows through reinforcement. So in ABA, our reinforcement is frequent. We are reinforcing every desired behavior all the time. It's immediate. So we're doing it right then. So we can see that behavior change. It's individualized. So if Johnny likes tickles and Tommy likes to bounce on his ball, they can do their own different things when it's time for their reinforcement time. So we can individualize it to whatever the kiddos like to do. It might not be conducive for school. So if we know we have a new learner who's coming in and their reinforcement is that they get tickles every time they answer a question, right? That's obviously not something that could be implemented in school, but we can do that in ABA for the time being to get those skills that we need to. Um, and then this is a huge one in ABA. We have fewer hard no's. So by that I mean, if it's time for lunch and we are trying to make that lunch transition and we have a kiddo who's not ready to make that transition or is not wanting to make that transition, we don't have to go right at that time. Now, when you think about school, they are on a schedule because that whole school is rocking and rolling. So if it is 11:30, it's time for lunch and I need you to line up and I need you to walk down to the lunchroom with the class. If we're having that struggle, if you're if the client or the kid is having a tough time in that moment, that's going to be really hard for the school to support. They'll likely have to call down support from the admin team, be it a dean or an assistant principal or someone else, because we've got to get those other 20 something kids down to the lunchroom because we can't miss that time. So that's a hard no. We can't miss our lunch. We've got to go right now. So in ABA, we don't have a ton of those hard no's. We're able to be flexible and move with where the kiddo is at. In school, those hard no's come up a lot. And I know as parents, you have a lot of hard no's as well, where it's like, it just can't happen today. We just can't do that. So that can be really something to think about as well if our kiddos are prepared for that. So when we look at just, again, the types of reinforcement, gen ed preschool, it's not as frequent. For like tangible items too, they can't be, playing with things all the time. It's got to be conductive and conducive to preschool. So something that they can have there that they can implement pretty easily and pretty quickly. And more of those hard no's. Gen ed kindergarten, it's going to be really infrequent. So really thinking about it, most kindergarten classrooms will have one or two, maybe 20-minute recess periods a day. And kids are working for that recess time. That's a long time. Usually it's several hours of work time before they can access that reinforcement time. So that's quite a big jump from I answer one question, I get my reinforcement, to several hours of work before I can have my time to do the things that I want to do. So that's a really big jump between those two. And then it also sometimes doesn't look like that. Sometimes it looks like something like a pajama party, or on Friday, we all get to, have 5 extra minutes of recess, but maybe it's Monday and you're telling me I have to wait till Friday. So that can be really tough. It's a lot less frequent for kiddos. They've got to follow a lot of rules and a lot of procedures until they can access that reinforcement. When they do, it's got to be, something they can do in school. So it can't be, watching a preferred video during the school day or things like that. Sometimes it can be tied to home, so you can have maybe some sort of behavior agreement with parents in school. If you have a great day, when you get home, you can access this thing. But again, those hard no's are there. And then, as you can imagine, special education, it's again variable. So they are able to do a little bit more of this individualized reinforcement for specific kiddos. They might have something really specific that Johnny likes to play with when he's in his reinforcement time. They can have that in the room. And if he needs to go over into the corner and kind of hang out and have his time when he's done with his work, they can do that in those kinds of rooms. But it's still got to be conducive to school, right? So it's got to be something that they can do within a classroom. There's still those hard no's and waiting, but there's a little bit more flexibility within those, with having just a little bit more support and less kiddos in those classrooms. So I hope that was not too much information. I feel like it's always a lot. But again, just wanted to say that I'm really excited to be here and sharing this information with you guys. Again, it's one of the things that I love about Bierman, that this company is putting the thought into these transitions early and really diving into what are the important things that we need to teach our kids before they make these transitions. So thank you.
Thank you, Haley. That was super helpful. One other key difference that I wanted to address that didn't kind of fit with those slides is just that one-on-one ABA is a medical service. It's based on medical necessity, so technically not an educational placement, and it's typically covered by insurance or private pay. And school is educational and not medical, and is funded by local and state funding. So just we a lot of times get questions about like academics, and how we explain that is we're prepping for school readiness so they can access the academics, but we're not necessarily going to have goals that are like specifically targeting math or reading or anything like that. All right, so with these settings in mind, I'll note that our goal at Bierman is to prepare clients for their potential least restrictive environment so they can be as independent as possible and have access to as much of the grade level academic content as possible. But a general ed setting isn't the best option for all kids, and if a child isn't prepared to keep up or tolerate that level of expectation, they inevitably won't be successful and they'll end up transitioning into a more restrictive setting pretty quickly. So for some of our clients, their least restrictive setting will be that special education setting where they can have adequate support. We certainly don't want to recommend gen ed for a learner who needs that additional support. And so for us, we're assessing readiness not only for a timeline to transition, but also to what type of setting. This is a pie chart here showing the settings that our clients transitioned to from the 2024 year. The majority did transition into gen ed settings, often with support. We're currently in the process of, following up with some of these clients and, essentially, did these placements stick? Did they start in a general ed setting and then after a month of that not working out, did they transition into another classroom? And as we get that information, so far it's looking pretty good, but we would modify things. We want to make sure that we're preparing them for not only that initial transition, but a stable transition so they don't, they're not flip-flopping between classes too much. Which kind of leads me to the importance of assessing readiness for next settings and looking at various next settings. So in the next few slides, I will share a little bit about our current process. Um, we are, like I said, highly motivated to get kids ready for school settings. We are not an agency that tries to keep kids as long as possible because we can individualize and we can just tailor everything to their child. Like we could, yes, every child could continue to benefit from ABA, but our goal is to get them ready for those next settings, and especially in line with what the parent is hoping for. So our process is really starts on day one and continues through discharge. So when a client starts out with us, we, interview the family and ask them what they hope for their child to transition, when they hope for them to transition, into what type of setting. This gives us a way to align our clinical approach, make sure we're working on the skills for those next settings. And it also provides us a way to guide conversations about transitions and importantly, measure progress towards what the parents would identify as a successful transition. Throughout the time that a child is with us, every 6 months or so, we conduct a comprehensive assessment, a transition readiness assessment, to determine potential readiness to transition to various next settings. And then we take the results from that transition readiness assessment and put it into a document to share our clinical recommendations with the family so they can weigh those recommendations and ultimately they're the ones that make a decision about either transitioning to school or remaining in ABA. So this is just a quick example of a report that we prepare and we review every 6 months. We call it our graduation planning report. And at these meetings, we revisit the family's original and current goals. We share our current clinical recommendations, including some timelines and like possible next settings. We present the scores and the data that support our recommendations. And then we spend some time talking about what are the required skills for the next settings. Where are we now? And what do we need to do to continue closing the gap? So Haley kind of shared the big differences between these settings, and we are aware of those differences, but it's our job to gradually make things at Bierman look like they will look at school. So yes, we can reinforce all the time, and we can use these crazy, we can use slime, we can use food at any time, but that's not going to be the case in the school setting. So this allows us to plan to kind of gradually make things look like those next settings. All right, my computer is frozen. Here we go. Sorry, it's just quick glitch. After reviewing the grad planning report, parents ultimately make the decision about whether they want to transition or not, in which case we would move on to collaborating with the next setting, or if they're going to stay, continue working on the skills needed for an eventual transition. Possibly they just need a little bit more time working on certain areas, and we can delay that transition by a few months to work on those skills. Deciding between comprehensive one-on-one ABA and school is a personal decision. It is a caregiver decision. It is not our decision. So our goal is just that families faced with this decision are as informed as possible to make the best decision for their child. So, when we share the clinical recommendations with the family, the goal is that we have a good understanding of why the family wants to transition. What is it that they're looking for, and then help them see whether what they're looking for is likely to happen if their child transitions at that time. So, for example, if a parent wants their child to transition because, they're like, well, I really want them to be around other peers their age. Maybe like so and so told me I should put them in school so they can be around peers. If that learner isn't yet attending to or copying peers in the contrived environment of ABA, it's probably the case that they're not going to pick up skills from peers in that larger environment with more distractions and less support. So, being able to talk through that and kind of set the expectations, like I understand why you want to transition, but what this might look like is maybe not what you have in mind right now. So, how can we get there? What can we do? Would it be better for this learner to build up some of those skills first and then transition? Just kind of having that information can be helpful. In my role at Bierman, I'm involved with many transition discussions. And so these are just a few reasons that caregivers tend to give when sharing their plans to transition. Some of these are considered barriers, meaning like parents want to continue ABA, but they're facing barriers. That could be like financial or travel. Maybe their kids are school age and they think they have to be enrolled in school. And so when this is the case, we do try our best to come up with solutions to overcome barriers so the child can continue receiving the medically necessary services they need and that parents want. Other times, caregivers are wanting a school setting, even if they know they're not all the way ready. They're just kind of like, well, I've been driving past the bus every day, and I think it's time, whether they're fully ready or not. So in these cases, my role is to help the parent kind of weigh the risks and the benefits of that potential transition so they can make an informed decision. So considering readiness, thinking about all the things that Haley shared is really important here. And your BCBA should be able to give you an overview of your child's readiness as it compares to the expectations in the school setting. Having that understanding of the setting and support likely to be available and written into the IEP is critical. Haley did a nice job outlining various next settings according to several factors like the ratio and the type of instruction. But these are really general comparisons based on what we tend to see. It's possible that your specific your school district offers something different. Maybe they offer more. Maybe they offer ABA within the classroom. Maybe they're one of the few that is more likely to offer one-on-one support. Finding out that information ahead of a decision to transition is important because it will help you predict, whether that will be a smooth transition. Does your child have enough support? A note on ABA in schools, I do like to add this in here because we're hearing this a lot. ABA in schools doesn't always look the same as ABA and like even, a comprehensive provider like us or even, like a part-time. So just some questions to ask. I would be asking about, okay, how many hours will they have ABA? What does it look like? What's the training for the person providing it? Is it a behavior technician? Is there a BCBA? There often will be a BCBA, but what I have found is that the BCBAs in school settings have caseloads of upwards of 100. And so they're often coming in and like tweaking things on a plan, maybe crisis management, whereas BCBAs and ABA, like outside standalone ABA providers, often have caseloads of 5 to 7. So the amount of contact that you have with that BCBA, the training that that BCBA can provide, the changes that they can make, the tweaks for skills they're teaching or behaviors they're working on is very different. So just some really good questions to ask, just based on my experience with schools offering ABA. So understanding the why, considering the readiness, and having a solid understanding of the expectations of the next setting will allow you to adequately weigh the risks and the benefits. If a parent wants to transition because they're worried about their child falling behind academically, that's the why. And they transition without the critical ready to learn skills. Like maybe the child can't tolerate sitting yet or working on a task for more than 30 seconds. They're not quite ready. And you know that they're likely to be in a classroom with one teacher and 20 kids. So that's your understanding of the setting and support. You might be able to come to the conclusion that yes, they would have access to more academic content, but the risk of them falling behind quickly and being moved to another setting is high. So this parent, with the help of their BCBA, could consider whether more time in one-on-one ABA, working on some of those ready-to-learn skills and tolerating sitting for longer, will set them up for a more successful transition a few months later. So again, just weighing the risks and benefits is easier if you have a solid understanding of the setting. Either way, if a parent does decide to transition, whether they're ready or not, collaboration is really important and advocating for your child. You are a really important part of their team, and being involved in that advocacy is super helpful, and your ABA team should offer to do that as well. So just kind of want to spend the next few minutes just talking about what that collaboration can look like. Regardless of the reason for a transition and whether the learner is completely ready or not, this is going to be huge in setting your child up for success. Transparency and communication with your ABA team about upcoming transitions is critical. Like we want to have a really transparent relationship about plans to transition. Abrupt transitions are hard for everyone. It's not great for, the agency. It's not good for you, and it's ultimately the hardest on your child, right? And so being able to have that open dynamic about what the why behind why you want to transition is really should be something that your BCBA should be very open to. They should always work with you on a transition, even if we're not recommending it. Families have personal reasons for transitions, and our goal is to do everything we can for every client to set them up for success when they transition to school. Successful transitions take time. At Bierman, we like to plan our transitions out about a year in advance. And this allows time for the collaboration, for targeting prioritizing any remaining critical skills, fading one-on-one support, like actively and intentionally moving from what one-on-one ABA can look like and starting to make it look like it will in the next setting. And also, we always recommend requesting an evaluation and developing an IEP prior to a transition. So by knowing ahead of time when a transition might occur, we can make sure that's in place prior to the transition. So the next few slides, we will talk about the IEP process. This is just going to be very much an overview. If there are specific questions, I'm not even sure that we'll be able to answer super specific questions, but these are going to be guidelines that will be helpful. If you're currently receiving ABA, or BCBA should be able to help you walk through this process as well. But an IEP is an individualized education program, which is it's a legally required plan that outlines the supports, services, and goals your child needs in school. The process begins when your child is evaluated for special education. So you can initiate a referral for an evaluation. You're basically, giving consent for evaluations that will tell you whether or not your child is eligible for an IEP. So once the evaluations are complete, you'll meet with a team, and that usually includes teachers, a school psychologist, a special education teacher, could be occupational therapists and special or speech therapists, and you, the parent, because you are an equal and essential team member on the IEP team. During the IEP meeting, the team will review your child's strengths and needs and creates a plan with measurable goals, accommodations, and supports. This could look like specialized instruction, some of the things Haley mentioned, like bouncing on a ball, maybe preferential seating. What will the physical environment look like? Social skills programming, occupational therapy, speech. It can cover a very wide variety of services. For children with autism, there might be specific behavior intervention plans, communication supports, structure, environmental modifications. After the plan is written, the school begins providing the services, progress is monitored throughout the year, and the IEP is reviewed annually. But we'll talk about this more in the next slide. You can request a review at any time. All right, so kind of moving into this, if you are ever unhappy or even just unsure about your IEP, here are some steps that you can take. You can always request another IEP meeting. You have the right to request a meeting at any time, not just once a year. If something feels off, unclear, maybe incomplete, not adequate enough, you can ask the team to reconvene and revise goals. You can ask them to revise services, the physical environment, what supports are in place. And this includes at the very beginning. You don't have to sign the IEP in that first meeting. You're probably going to feel compelled to. There's going to be in a room, you're going to go over an overwhelming amount of information. You can take the time to decide on whether you're happy with it. You can also sign it and then decide a month later you would like to reopen that IEP. So just know that is within your rights. You can ask for written explanations. If the school says no to a request that you want, you can ask for prior written notice to require the school to explain the decision in writing. That could help to kind of have a paper trail. You can always request more data or a new evaluation. You can request something what's called an independent educational evaluation. The school would typically pay for this if they and then they have somebody independent come in and reevaluate things. You can bring support to the meetings. Your ABA team can come. They're going to be more of a, here's what we're seeing. Here's the support that we have in place. This is what works for us. They are not necessarily there as an advocate. There are IEP advocates that are highly recommended if you get to a point where you're really unhappy and the school's not working with you. But your ABA team can at least kind of speak on your child's behalf of what supports can be really helpful. And then you can use a mix of informal problem solving, just asking to meet, but it may move to the point of needing to file a complaint or request a mediation, such as a due process hearing. And that's a more formal process if things just aren't, you're trying and it's just not moving in the direction that you think your child needs. So clarifying this could be to adjust goals, adjust settings, things like that. And regardless, you're going to continue collaborating throughout. This slide here just shows some of your rights. There's a lot of acronyms here. So the IEP is the document, but this is all falling under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is a federal law that guarantees students with disabilities a free and appropriate public education. And this requires schools to provide the IEP and the supports written within the IEP and ensure the least restrictive environment is offered to them. And these are just a couple of rights that I wanted you to be aware of. You can, like I mentioned, request evaluations at any time. You have a right to participate fully in all IEP meetings. There should never be an IEP meeting without you there. You are the most important person there. You always have access to all school records for your child and the data that they're using to make decisions. You have the right to agree or disagree with the IEP, and that should not impact the services that your child receives. You have the right to request changes or another meeting whenever needed. Like I mentioned, receiving a written notice, and you have the right to seek mediation or due process if disagreements are not resolved. So just some final key points and takeaways. There is no better setting. It's only the right fit for your child right now based on where they are. And readiness does matter. Transitions go best when skills, supports, and expectations are aligned. Collaboration is essential for this to find out, are the skills, supports, and expectations aligned? That's going to come from collaboration. Your family, the ABA provider, and the school, they should share the same goal, your child's success. So collaborating is going to be the best way to make that happen. And as mentioned, you do have rights under IDEA, including participating in those decisions, requesting data, and advocating for needed supports. And lastly, your child's path is individual. Progress looks different for every learner at different points in time as well, and that's okay. So what's best for your child may look different than another child. And these, hopefully today, we equipped you with some tools to make those individualized decisions.